1 Samuel 25, starting at verse 1. David, Nabal, and Abigail. Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him at his home in Ramah. Then David moved down into the desert of Paran. A certain man in Maon, who had a property there at Carmel, was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, and her husband was a surly and mean man in his dealings. He was a Calebite. While David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, "Go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, 'Long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours. Now I hear that it is sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with us, we did not ill-treat them, and the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your own servants, and they will tell you. Therefore be favorable towards my men, since we come at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them.' When David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name. Then they waited. Nabal answered David's servants, 'Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat that I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where?' David's men turned around and went back. When they arrived, they reported every word. David said to his men, 'Each of you strap on your sword.' So they did, and David strapped on his as well. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. One of the servants told Abigail, Nabal's wife, 'David sent messengers from the wilderness to give our master these greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not ill-treat us, and the whole time we were there out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. Day and night, they were a wall around us the whole time we were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him.' Abigail acted quickly. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them onto donkeys. She then told her servants, 'Go on ahead, I'll follow you.' But she did not tell her husband Nabal. As she came riding her donkey into the mountain ravine, there were David and his men descending towards her, and she met them. David had just said, 'It's been useless, all my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness so that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave one male of all who belong to him.' When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before him with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, 'Pardon your servant, my lord, and let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. Please pay no attention, my lord, to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him. And as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my lord sent. And now, my lord, as surely as the Lord your God live, and as you live, since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, may your enemies and all who are intent on harming my lord be like Nabal. And let this gift, which your servant has brought to my lord, be given to the men who follow you. Please forgive your servant's presumption. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my lord, because you fight the Lord's battles. And no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my Lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. but the lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. When the Lord has fulfilled my Lord every good thing he has promised concerning him, and has appointed him ruler over Israel, my Lord will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed, or of having avenged himself. And when the Lord your God has brought my Lord's success, remember your servant. David said to Abigail, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak." Then David accepted from her hand what she had brought to him and said, "Go home in peace. I have heard your words and granted your request." When Abigail went to Nabal, he was in the house holding a banquet like that of a king. He was in high spirits and very drunk. So she told him nothing at all till daybreak. Then in the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all these things, and his heart failed him, and he became like stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Praise be to the Lord, who has upheld my cause against Nabal for treating me with contempt. He has kept his servant from doing wrong and has brought Nabal's wrongdoing down on his own head." Then David sent word to Abigail, asking her to become his wife. His servants went to Carmel and said to Abigail, "David has sent us to you to take you to become his wife." She bowed down with her face to the ground and said, "I am your servant and am ready to serve you and wash the feet of my Lord's servants." Abigail quickly got on a donkey and, attended by her 5 female servants, went with David's messengers and became his wife. David had also married Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they both were his wives. But Saul had given his daughter Michal, David's wife, to Paltiel, son of Laish, who was from Galim.
It's a bit wet out there, isn't it? I was telling some people earlier that people think it's rainy in Lancaster, but we're not allowed to use water at the moment because we've got a bit of a drought. So there you go. We get our water from Haweswater Reservoir in the Lake District. At this time of year, it's normally 70% full. At the moment, it's 20% full. So you've got all the rain. Let's hope I don't take it home with me. Thinking about water and floods, I wonder who you go to in a crisis if you had like a flood in your house. We had one. Not because of rain, but because of my husband's DIY. We did have a bit of a drip. He allows me to tell this story. We had a bit of a drip coming through the ceiling in the kitchen, and he thought, "That's okay, I know what to do." And he went and did it. But what he did was actually much worse. And then we not only had a bit of a drip, but we had 2 inches full of water. It was like a swimming pool in our kitchen, on the kitchen floor. Well, the good news was we had one of those friends that you can call upon who is competent and does know what to do in a crisis, and actually knew what to do and what we shouldn't have done and why we were in the situation we were in. It's good to have someone you can call on in a crisis, isn't it? And I don't know, as you were reading that story, listening to it being read to us really beautifully, actually, whether you think Abigail is the sort of person that you could go to in a crisis. I mean, she is that sort of person. She does seem really competent, doesn't she? And would you describe Abigail as bold? Well, she certainly acts boldly here. She's described, did you notice how she's described? She's described as beautiful and intelligent. That's quite unusual, actually. There's only one other person in the Bible who's described as intelligent. You find him in Acts, and he's a Roman official who listens to Paul and becomes converted. It's an unusual description. Now, Abigail, beautiful, intelligent, You'd think that she might have a great match in her marriage. You think she could be linked with the sort of Daniel Craig type figure. Everyone's talking about him at the moment, aren't they? But no, well, she is linked with somebody who was powerful, a wealthy man. And maybe like many before her, beautiful woman matched to the wealthy man. Maybe she had no choice in her marriage, probably didn't have any choice in her marriage. Beauty bought by money. But she's a huge contrast, isn't she, to her husband, who is described as surly and mean, or the ESV puts it, and I think this is even clearer, harsh and badly behaved. And whose name is Fool. I just can't imagine his parents called him that when he was born, but he's certainly known as that now. Well, we don't know what the relationship was between Nabal and Abigail, but we know it's not an equal match in intelligence. We can imagine that Nabal is not Abigail's soulmate, and that he would have been a difficult man to be married to. We see later on in the story, don't we, that he drinks heavily, and she daren't speak to him at that point. No, I think life was quite difficult for Abigail, being married to Nabal. And then Nabal behaves differently with David, doesn't he? He is difficult. Although you could ask, should Nabal have treated David's servants differently? You know, when they come along with their request, is it a fair request? I mean, Nabal's response is very negative. What does he say? Verse 10, who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where? Is this reasonable? Well, David certainly describes his action here as evil. And actually, that is the case. Because as you read this story, you see that David's men have been caring for Nabal's men and all Nabal's enormous herds, his thousands of goats and 3,000 sheep. In fact, Nabal's own servants say this. They say, these men were very good to us. They did not ill-treat us. Night and day, they were a wall around us. In fact, they had been protecting Nabal's men. And then again, Nabal says, who is this David? Do you think he didn't know who David was? David was a bit of a celebrity. And when a celebrity comes to your area, you generally know about it. Word goes out on the street. Now, I don't know if any of you watch Peaky Blinders. I have to confess, I haven't actually seen Peaky Blinders, but it is filmed a lot in Lancashire. And the next season was filmed in our local park, large parts of it, and there's a big memorial called the Ashton Memorial. And the word on the street, well, everyone was very excited. And I don't know if this name will mean anything to you, but everyone was very excited that Tom Hardy had been seen in our local spa. Rumour goes out. Well, David's more significant than Tom Hardy. David is the one that's killed Goliath. And then he had fought many of the Lord's battles. And he was a hero. And the people had a song about him. They sang this song. They said, Saul has killed his thousands, but David has killed his tens of thousands. And they danced to that. Not quite the sort of song that we might dance to. But it was obviously really popular because later on in the story, a Gentile king actually says, isn't this David about whom they sing? Saul has killed his thousands and David has killed his tens of thousands. So that song had spread. David is a celebrity. He's known. But more than that, if you notice where Nabal lived, he lived in Maon. And Maon is where this big chase had been going on. If you look at the end of chapter 23, you know that David is in Maon because he's been looking after Nabal's men and their herds. But Saul has gone in pursuit of David to the desert of Maon. So not only have you got David, the celebrity, in the area, but you've also had Saul turn up with huge amounts of soldiers. This wouldn't have been a secret. Saul wanted to kill David. He hated David because he knew he was losing his kingdom to David. Though David wasn't a stranger. So why does Nabal turn David away? Well, he knows that Saul is there to hunt David. And Saul has turned into the sort of king that nobody wants. There was a priest who helped David out when David was on the run. And what did Saul do? He killed him for helping David. But more than that, he killed all the priests and murdered and put to death all the women and children in the town of Nob, where they came from. Saul has turned into a monstrous king. And Nabal would have heard about that. No, Nabal isn't interested in David and being on David's side at all. And yet, we don't know for sure, because Nabal is an idiot. He might not have even been aware of any of that. Maybe he is so much of an idiot he didn't know. We do know that he says he doesn't want to take his bread and his water. Why should I take my bread and water? Why should I give it to them? It's mine. Maybe it's just pure greed. But he's really wealthy. He's got a lot of stuff. Well, David is furious. He is furious at Nabal's response. David says this. He says, "May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him." Now I'm going to tell you that the word he uses here is not male. He uses another phrase, which our modern translations are too polite to say, and I'm too polite to tell you this afternoon. But if you want to know what that phrase is, the King James Version quite likes the gritty language and uses the gritty language, so you can look it up in the King James Version if you want. But David is furious because he says Nabal has paid him back evil for good. And David is really close here to bloodshed. He's really close now to avenging himself. And yet David has been so good up to this point. This is David who promised to be king, being chased by Saul, and had the opportunity, just in the previous chapter, to actually get rid of Saul himself and kill him. But he didn't, because he said that would be wrong. And now David is in this place where he is really close to avenging himself. Leadership that is corrupt is terrifying, isn't it? Leadership that's brutal is horrendous. Why did so many people want to leave Afghanistan? Why do so many people still want to leave many places in the world? The fear of a cruel regime. David's been anointed to be God's king, Israel's king, and my goodness, they need him to be good. They need him to be merciful. They need him, when he's angry, in his wrath, to be merciful. Abigail desperately needed David to be merciful. And so she flees to him. You think about that for a minute. She flees to the one who's threatening her. That's bold, isn't it? She doesn't run for her life. She runs to God's anointed king and begs for mercy. How can she dare? And yet, how can she not? So much depends on her, doesn't it? Her servants have just gone to her and said, can you help us? And she is the problem solver. And you see, what she does. I mean, she moves into action immediately. I mean, the way she gets hold of all this food, 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep. Goodness, what she's got in her house. I wouldn't like to have to put together that sort of picnic. I'd really struggle. My cupboards have not got half as well. They haven't got anything very impressive in it at all. But she sends that gift on ahead. But then she herself comes on her donkey and she goes into the mountain ravine, just where the place where David is shouting this very coarse, angry language. And the narrator tells us that she overhears it. She hears that. She must have been terrified. But her response is so different from Nabal's. Do you see what she did? She gets off the donkey and she bows before David with her face to the ground. And over again, as you follow what she's saying, she calls herself your servant. And she calls David my Lord. And she begs for mercy. She says, pardon your servant, my Lord, and let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. Please pay no attention, my Lord, to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name, and his name means fool, and folly goes with him. And as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my Lord sent. I wonder what you make of that. I didn't see the men. Is she saying that the situation's actually all her fault? If she'd been there, she'd have been able to solve it. It wouldn't have happened. I think she is. I mean, imagine being Abigail. I think she spends her life firefighting. I think she's always picking up the pieces from her husband. She's used to using her judgment. I think in many ways she exemplifies the perfect helpmate, repairing the destruction that Nabal's caused in the home. But this time she's failed. This time she hadn't been there when it was needed. And she pleads for mercy. And she pleads on the basis of what she knows about David's goodness. And she pleads on the basis of God's sovereignty. See, she trusts David, but she really trusts the Lord and what he is doing and the promises he's made to David. She can intercede like this because she is so confident in what God is doing. And so she says, and now, my Lord, as surely as the Lord your God lives, and as you live, since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed, do you think she knew about that event in the cave? Or do you think she just knows right now, David, you haven't gone through with what you said you'd do, and God's kept you from doing it? The Lord has kept you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands. May your enemies and all who are intent on harming my Lord be like Nabal. And then what she goes on to say next is absolutely astonishing. Please forgive your servant's presumption. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my Lord, because you fight the Lord's battles. And no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live, even though someone's pursuing you to take your life. The life of my Lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. When the Lord has fulfilled for my Lord every good thing he promised concerning him, and has appointed him ruler over Israel, my Lord will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or of having avenged himself. Notice those lovely touches she puts in as she speaks. She reminds David that he was the one that was called to fight the Lord's battles, not seek vengeance for himself. And she uses that image of the sling, which must help David remember that time when he trusted God completely and slayed Goliath. It's bold, isn't it? It's a real gentle boldness. She's telling him truth in a way that he can hear. This man is a seasoned warrior, and he's threatening her whole world, and she speaks like this. She says this incredible statement: the Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my Lord. The Lord your God, David. Remember your God. And that statement is prophetic too, just like Hannah. Abigail talks to David of a lasting dynasty, a house that will last forever, a kingdom that will last forever, that will not be torn away like Saul's is going to be. Again, this is the first time you get that image for David, that his kingdom is going to be lasting dynasty. And it's expounded and promised really explicitly in 2 Samuel chapter 7. And so she then pledges her allegiance to David. And when the Lord your God has brought my Lord success, remember your servant. She submits herself fully to David, the Lord's anointed. Now, this story does present us with a little bit of a challenge, I think, because we could worry that, well, Abigail's not really following Nabal's lead here, is she? I mean, she is not submitting to Nabal. She's not submitting to his folly. She honors God's anointed one. She bows before him and explicitly disobeys her husband. I don't know if you struggle with that, but I want to say that if we think that that is wrong, then we have misunderstood what submission in marriage is. We've got it badly wrong. John Woodhouse has written a great commentary on Samuel, and he says this. He says, the biblical teaching about wives submitting to their husbands is not ever about wives submitting to, accepting from, or supporting evil actions or words from their husbands, and to suggest otherwise is to turn biblical teaching on its head. We need to get our understanding of submission right. It's not about submitting to abuse. Just to say, this is an issue I address in my new book, which is called Liberated, How the Bible Exalts and Dignifies Women. And I look at Abigail and the issue of marriage and the beautiful picture of marriage that we do have. It's not out yet, out in November. We need to see that Abigail has been a very good helpmate in difficult circumstances. She's acting for Nabal's good, and she's taking full responsibility for her household. But it's a tough place to be, and it's a bold place to be. She's having to line herself up with God's anointed. She actually parallels a bit with Jonathan Saule's son, who also aligns himself with David against his father. What is true wisdom? Abigail's described as intelligent. True wisdom is fleeing to the Lord's anointed for mercy. True wisdom is running to him, whatever else is going on in the world, whatever else anyone is saying. True wisdom is turning to the one God has made and promised to be king. And that is true wisdom for us, isn't it? Turning to Jesus above all others, putting him first. Well, Abigail made her choice. And God used that choice for David's good. As Abigail made her choice, God used her to teach David something incredible, to keep him from needless bloodshed. And David praises Abigail for it. Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you to meet me today. I don't think she felt very sent. Isn't it wonderful the way human responsibility and God's sovereignty work together in that way? God was using her. She was just doing what made sense. Run to David and asked for mercy, and God used her. And it mattered that David heard what she said, because it mattered that he was kept from bloodshed, and he sees it. He says that he's been kept from bloodshed and from avenging himself. It mattered that David trusted that God was the one who would deal with his enemies. And so, well, we read the end of the story, didn't we? And we see that when Abigail went home, well, in the end, God did deal with Nabal. David needed reminding of the lesson that Hannah spoke of, which we looked at this morning. It's not by strength that one prevails. Those who oppose the Lord will be broken. The Most High will thunder from heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. David was going to be established as king, but by God, God's strength. And it mattered that he was established in the right way, because his kingship points us to the kingship of his greatest son, who's on that throne forever. The king who came into this world, not to condemn the world, but to save it. David foreshadows that king. The king who came, although angry at our sin, came to rescue us. God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. That's good news, isn't it? In his wrath, he remembers mercy. God's king is in the business of forgiveness. There is mercy. We can run to him. And we can run to him with the knowledge that he is a good and righteous king. A king who did this when he had insults hurled at him. He did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. He himself bore our sins in his body on the cross, so that we might die to sins and live for righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. Peter wrote those words. Peter saw it. He was a witness to how our King Jesus behaved when he was mocked and insulted. And Jesus did that to show mercy, so that in wrath there is rescue and mercy. Abigail fled to David. In your wrath, remember mercy. And we flee to Jesus. In your wrath, remember mercy. What is Christian boldness? Ultimately, it is confidence to approach the throne of grace, to approach the Lord and say, have mercy. God, the ruler of the world, before whom we deserve nothing, yet loves us so much we can flee to him, who is merciful. We've seen both Hannah and Abigail trust themselves to God with bold faith and bold action. What will that boldness look for you? What will it look like for you in your lives? I don't really know. It's going to be different for each one of us. It may actually be turning to him for mercy for the first time in your life. You may have actually been, in Christian circles and kicking around, but deep down feel that actually you can't approach God because you're so unforgivable. You feel so much shame. You can flee to him. He longs to show mercy. It may be that you know the Lord, but you are carrying so much pain and so many burdens, and you somehow feel that you need to hold it all together. And you haven't actually allowed yourself to go before him and just weep and cry out, Abba, Father, and know that the Spirit will pray prayers in your weakness and will be there with you. It may be very different. It may be that you are fearful of standing firm as a Christian, of lining yourself up with Jesus publicly. It may be at work, it may be even in your own family. It can be hard. But there is no other rock worth standing on. It's utter foolishness not to line yourself up with Jesus. Everything else fails. Everyone else will fail. It may be speaking the gospel to somebody, again, who needs to hear the reminders of great truths about God, because their life is about to take a really dangerous turn, just like David's was. And Abigail gently, boldly reminded him of the truth of God's promises. It can be hard to speak to people, can't it? I don't know. I don't know what it will be like in your life, but I know this is true for all of us. We can be bold, not because of our temperament, not because of our colour of our trousers, even though they are lovely. You don't have to dye your hair red like Diane will on Strictly Tonight, or any of the elaborate costumes they'll be wearing. We can be bold because we know Jesus. And we have a relationship with him. But he's trustworthy. He's a trustworthy, good king. On Christ, the solid rock, we stand. All other ground is sinking sand. There is no one holy like the Lord. There's no one beside him. No other rock like our God. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your Son. Thank you that he is a good king. Thank you that he is just. Thank you that in his wrath he remembered mercy. Thank you that he didn't retaliate but suffered so that we could be saved. Thank you that we can flee to you and you don't reject us. Thank you that you hold on to us. Father, teach us to hold on to you more, to stand more confidently on you, and to help others do so as well. And we ask that in Jesus' name. Amen.